I'm Dr. Kathy Rose Mockery. I am the Director Emerita of the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity. It was my honor to serve as director of that great center for 20 years. I recently retired, and I am thrilled to be the moderator today for this event. This panel is, I'm going to read it to make sure I get it right. We demand the call for healthcare, childcare, affirmative action, and leadership reforms at KU. This is such an important part of the February Sisters to talk about what it was they advocated for and how that played out. I'm really excited to have our panelists here to fill you in on what really happened. In the back, we have, if somebody wants to hold it up, a blue sheet with all the demands on it. And if you would like to follow along, there's plenty of them in the back. This is great. It helps when you talk about needing a microphone to actually use it. So this is the third in a series of 4 panels. Who's attended earlier ones? I've seen a number of you, many of you. I would like to welcome those who are streaming in today. We are streaming, and we are thrilled to have others join us today for this important panel. For those of you that haven't attended earlier panels, this event commemorates the 50th anniversary of the February Sisters, a group of 35 women and 4 children who occupied KU's East Asian Studies building on February 4th, 1972, demanding that the administration implement a number of measures, that's what we're here to talk about today, to increase gender equity. And 2 days before, Robin Morgan had given a presentation which got the group going, and I was going to say the February Sisters. They weren't really February Sisters yet. They would become the February Sisters. And I think, Kelly, you mentioned the woman who actually, sorry, I can't. Could you tell us the name of the woman who actually spurred it on?
Sarah Scott.
Sarah Scott. So we have Sarah Scott to thank for all the work that got going. There is, again, like I said, this is the third of 4 panels. The 4th panel is this coming Thursday. And it's called 50 Years Later, Current Student Activism at KU. And it really nicely wraps up our series of 4 panels. It talks about what is currently happening, what activism is going on now, and I really encourage you to come and hear from current students what's going on. It'll be at 6:30, 1 floor down. It'll be here in the Centennial Room, and starting at 6:30 this Thursday. Before we get started, there are apples in the back, right? There are apples. Who knows the story of the apples? Who wants to tell the apple story? Christine.
When the sisters vacated the building very early on Saturday morning, they left an apple on every desk. It was an apple of enlightenment, and it was a gift to us, from us to those who spend the night worrying about their research.
So in honor of that, we have apples in the back for you, please.
Yes, we don't.
Have a
last week.
virtual apple. Imagine how great those apples were. So, Before I introduce our remarkable panel, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors and partners. The Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity, Department of Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies, Hall Center for the Humanities, and the Watkins Museum of History. In addition to live streaming, we're also taping this panel, and it will go live on the WGSS Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies website at some point in the future. And so please encourage any friends who wanted to come, who couldn't, to see them on the website. Meg.
Yeah, Emily Taylor Center has a YouTube channel, and so we'll also post it there as well.
Wonderful. Good to have a couple of choices. I'm not going to block our panelists.
I'll go ahead.
Yeah. So I don't like to do a lot of reading. I do know these wonderful panelists, but in the interest of time and me having a tendency to really add plenty that we to this great panel, I'm going to go through and introduce each of our panelists tonight, and then I'm going to encourage them, if I leave out anything important, please do fill in the gaps for me. I am not in the right order, so I'm going to be in the right order. I'm going to start right here on and introduce Jenny McKee. She is Associate Director, Health Education Resource Office. She joined Watkins in 2007. When I found that date, I was surprised. Wow, I didn't realize that. She has a BS and an MS in Education Community Health, and she is known throughout campus for, she is a very popular speaker and is one of the best collaborators I have ever worked with. So you will see her everywhere on campus. She has a passion for health, which is what got her into the community health program to begin with. She is an avid runner and a cyclist. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
I'm going to go next to Dr. Robert Brown. And both Jenny and Dr. Brown work in the Watkins Memorial Health Building in Student Health Service. He is a physician with Student Health Services and has been there since 1997, 25 years. And you have been a practicing physician for more than 35 years, correct? So Dr. Brown is not a stranger to KU. In addition to his work as a physician, you started here as an undergrad and then went to KU Med Center, which is where your medical degree is from. Yes, welcome. Dr. Kelly Sartorius is next. Kelly has many, many roles, but we're going to identify one for the evening. Director of Advancement for Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area. And again, she has many roles and is sought out throughout the state for her much of the work that she does in higher ed and endowment work. She is the author of Sex in the Heartland. Do you mind, Kelly, holding that up?
Oh, but I'm not Sex in the Heartland.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It was a much better
line.
title than mine was.
Deans of Women and the Feminist Movement. I got on the wrong line.
That's okay.
It's a great book, and I encourage you to read it if you have not yet already. Making sure I'm on the right line. Now I'm nervous. Her areas of expertise include higher education history, feminism, KU in the 70s, including Dr. Emily Taylor, and who is the KU Dean of Women, and the February Sisters Action. So in that book, there's quite a bit written just about what we're talking about today. Dr. Sartorius has had an important role in the KU honor system, was there for close to 5 years, various capacities, including as a faculty member. She has a BA and a PhD from K-State and an MA from the University of Maryland. Thank you, Kelly. Next is Joan Rieber. Joan was the former director of Hilltop Childcare Center back then when you were director. 1975, just 3 years after it got started, all the way through 1993. At that point, you retired. Got her BA from Florida State, MA from KU. And as I mentioned, she was instrumental in the early efforts to get Hilltop going.
And certified.
Pardon me?
And certified.
And certified, yes. It was in, the original building was in the Wesley building, if you know where that is, right across from the Union, which really was not fit to be a child care center. So you had your hands full trying to navigate that and trying to manage all that's required to get a child care center going. She also has been very involved in the community, and you started Jabberwockers through the women's women's club, and that's still going, right?
It's still going, 26 years.
Yeah,
Three mornings a week.
Pretty impressive. Dr. Bailey. I will be on the right line and get your book correct. Dr. Beth Bailey is the Foundation Distinguished Professor, Department of History, and author of Sex in the Heartland. She's the real author. And this book also relates quite a bit to what we're talking about today. There's quite a bit in that book about this topic. She has a BA from Northwestern and an MA and a PhD from the University of Chicago. She's known nationally for her expertise and research on issues related to the military and U.S. society, war and society, history of gender and sexuality, and recent U.S. history. We were so fortunate to have her join our faculty in 2015. Thank you. Next, I'm going to introduce Jeremy Feit. Jeremy is the current director, executive director of Hilltop Child Development Center, and has been at Hilltop for 8 years. A bachelor's from Indiana University and a master's State University of New York at Buffalo. Prior to Lawrence, he lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, where he worked with Boys and Girls Clubs. He has a son who's 12 now, so he certainly understands issues related to childcare and working with children and making a child-centered environment. So glad you're here. At the end of the table, we're thrilled to have Kathy Hoggart. Kathy is a retired sales manager for Lucent Technologies and was the former director for KU Information Center, 1973 to 1979. And if you hear those dates, she was here in the very beginning when all this stuff was going on. So as Information Center director, she was in the thick of it. She had to know everything going on campus to do her job. So, and in having conversations with her, she really knows the campus environment and what was going on. So she has a lot to add to our conversation. She has a master's in history, she had a role in establishing RVSS, worked with Shirley Gillum Dahmer, who is first affirmative action director, so is quite knowledgeable about some of the affirmative action efforts that were going on early on at KU. I thank you all. So glad you're here. Oh, I need to hold this for a minute. I am going to take a quick minute to go through the demands. And then I'm going to turn it over to our panel. I think it's important, hopefully you picked up one of those blue sheets of paper, but quick run through so you know what it is we're talking about today. The 6 demands: create an affirmative action program to be planned and directed by February Sister designees. Create a free daycare center paid for by KU, directed by a steering committee comprised of women appointed by the February Sisters. February Sisters were very determined that these actions that they were presenting will go in the direction they were envisioning, as you can tell. Third was to select a woman to fill the vacant vice chancellorship of academic affairs. Included in this demand was that a woman should be added to the financial aid administration to ensure equity in scholarship distribution, which was a problem during that time. Fourth, end unfair employment practices that use civil service as a means to freeze women's wages and foster disparities between male and female salaries. Fifth was to create an autonomous women's studies department, as they said, controlled and chiefly taught by women. And 6 was to establish a women's health program that would include free pap smears, pelvic exams, free access to birth control for both married and unmarried women, a competent resident gynecologist, counseling service for women, especially regarding birth control, and STIs, and special women's problems. That was their language. That was what was used back there. So, given that, I am now going to throw out my first question and going to ask our panel, if you were on campus or around town in the 70s, what was the climate like for women?
You want to take that?
Any of you that would like to respond?
Yeah.
And don't feel obligated if you want to or don't have a response.
I think it's easy to forget how things were very different. I came to KU in the fall of 1969. This was before Roe versus Wade. This was before Title IX. This was before Ruth Bader Ginsburg performed her magic to make sure that the Civil Rights Act of 1965 would actually mean something in lives. It's really difficult to remember back then. And I don't remember women's issues really being at the forefront. I remember that there were racial disparity issues that were making people very unhappy, and there was the war in Vietnam that seemed to fill our lives. So that's what I remember, having come here as a graduate student in the fall of '69.
I just thought you'd be good to overview it if you wanted to. Again, Professor Bailey.
All right. I'm not speaking as someone who was here at KU at this period. I did go to college in the late 1970s, but up in Chicago. But I'm a historian who spent a lot of time studying this, and so Kelly and I both have written about it, and we can probably give a little bit of context that only complements the experiences of those people who were here and who participated. What I would say is, just to support your comments, is that it's hard to imagine how different things were then. So many things that we probably unfortunately take for granted today, and probably should no longer be doing so. The early 1970s, though, in many ways was a moment of opportunity and possibility. And it's important not to think about what happened here with the February Sisters in isolation, because there was so much upheaval and so much demand for change that was happening here on campus and then also nationwide. So what the February Sisters were reacting to in many ways was the hand of the ways that things had functioned in the previous decades. The mid-1960s might as well have been the 1950s, given the changes that we think about. And a lot of the restrictions that existed on women's lives carried over into the 1970s. And at the same time, women and their allies were starting to see that there were ways to challenge these issues. And many of those people who wanted to challenge the issues were coming from participation in other kinds of social movements, movements for racial equity, movements against the war in Vietnam. The women's movement in Lawrence, like the rest of the country, was extraordinarily diverse. People had different goals. They embraced different means. And what I would say from the outside, from reading and talking to people, is I'm struck by how both radical and at the same time institutional the demands of the February Sisters were. This was a time when lots of people were saying, essentially, let's burn it down, let's get rid of authority, the university isn't legitimate. They weren't saying that. What they were saying was, let's change this institution, let's bring about fundamental change. And that was an extraordinarily radical demand at the same time that it was a demand that didn't exactly sound radical because of the people who were rejecting the legitimacy of so many structures. I can talk more about the ways in which, especially questions of gender equity in terms of reproductive health, functioned in the 1960s and early 70s, but I just wanted to sort of draw attention to the institutional demands and to the ways in which this is part of a much broader movement that was taking place in the country as a whole, even though it had its very specific Lawrence manifestations.
I just wanted to say that I have 5 children and 4 were daughters, and they were all impacted by everything you said. And I was determined that they would be fierce and they would do whatever they wanted to do, and they did. But I had to restrict them as far as, say, our son could go off, wander around the campus, but they were not allowed to. So it was sort of an unsafe time for them, I thought. But I wanted them to be really strong, and they are.
And then I would just add, Professor Bailey and my research overlap in different ways. One of the things that I've been most interested in was, as I interviewed various February Sisters and then some of the women administrators on campus, there were so many pieces that were happening with the February Sisters so quickly, I think, that sometimes there was a group over here doing one thing that had no idea there was a group over here doing another thing. And so to me, what's interesting about the February Sisters is that there was both an institutional strategy that came out of the Dean of Women's Office and Professor Marilyn Stockstead. Those two just sat down and figured out how they were going to handle sort of the institutional side. Then there was a group of radical feminists who met with Robin Morgan, as you mentioned, 2 days before, one of whom stood up, her name was Sarah Scott, she stood up and said, well, let's do something about it. Well, I think everybody went their separate ways and started recruiting people to do something about it. And so what you ended up with was this group of women who took over the East Asian Studies building, and with their set of demands. And the demands look exactly like what the Dean of Women's Office had been working on for a while. And it took Dean Taylor about 7 years to admit to me that she knew that it was going to be a takeover, and she probably could have tried to stop it, but she didn't on purpose, because she really felt like they'd tried everything else for the affirmative action, for the childcare. Especially, she was so frustrated with the health center because they would treat the male and the female body as if they were exactly the same, and then anything that females needed that men didn't need just was extra service. So there was this movement amongst the women. There was a movement of the women students, radical students. Then there were some students who were less radical, who didn't probably camp out, but were involved in some other ways. And then there was the institutional response. And so I think it's interesting to know a little bit about all of that. And because I do think things on campuses often happen that way, where there's some quiet voices over here who choose not to do anything so that something can happen. I do know that Casey Ike, I don't know how many of you all know Casey Ike, but I do know that Casey Ike was living with Dean Taylor at the time, and she went to Dean Taylor's house and she took everything out of the refrigerator and she took it to the East Asian Studies building, and she passed all of Dean Taylor's food into the East Asian Studies building so that they would have food for the evening. So it's those kind of cooperative things that, obviously she knew Dean Taylor would be perfectly happy to have him give all of her food to the February Sisters. So those are the pieces that I think I've probably spent the most time on, and certainly understand some of the background with regard to the reproductive health and the childcare. But those were both efforts that the Dean of Women's Office had worked on for a very, very long time and had not been able to get any ground with the, there was a physician named Schwegler, Dr. Schwegler, who was absolutely refused to move at all on women's health. And she also couldn't get anybody in the administration to support the childcare. So glad to answer any questions as we come up. But also, for those of you who've never looked at it, there's a really great article called A Day Without the Feminist Movement. Have you read that one? And it talks about all the things that in pre-Title IX were realities. Like, you had breast cancer, you went in to get your cancer treated, you didn't get a choice on whether or not you were getting a double mastectomy or not. I mean, the doctors decided. You didn't have access to credit cards. You didn't have access to credit. There's just so many things. So if you ever get a chance, take a look at A Day Without Feminism. It's a great article. It takes you like 10 minutes to read it. It's the easiest assignment you'll ever do.
So why don't we talk a little bit about when you are hearing the environment that was happening in the 70s, tell us what's going on now in the health center and the kinds of services you provide and how you provide them.
Sure. And I'll just add, I guess I was on campus in the 70s, but I came here in 1978 as a student, and I think a lot of this to me was not really in my radar. So I'll just say, but it's certainly, in looking back, it's a drastic change, but there's still certainly a lot of the same issues continue to be present. But as far as students come to the health center now, certainly there's availability of women's health, and it's been as far as the education piece in terms of sexually transmitted infections, and there's been obviously a lot of development in terms of contraception and contraceptive care, but all of that's very available. And as far as now, they have the student health fee, so again, students can come in. Their services are not always free, as they said here, but again, sometimes we're going as far as the insurance and working more and more to have it be available. It's also, I think there was a lot more, as you say, a lot of judgment regarding sexual activity, and in terms of just the availability for sexually transmitted infection and treatment, and for women's health, as well as some expansion of what I guess we would term gender care in terms of women's health, in terms of, for instance, transgender care, and we now have patients that we see, so it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of what is women's health and sexual and gender diversity, but we have a broad spectrum of care for really all students, regardless of their gender and sexuality, sexual orientation, sexual activity. So I think that's a brief.
Sure. Yeah, just to kind of dovetail on some of the things that Dr. Brown was talking about is, of course, I mean, the demands of, the contraception to be free and for it to be available. Holy smokes, y'all. I don't know if you know this, but it wasn't even legal for unmarried women to get birth control in 1972. I mean, very shortly after that was a landmark Supreme Court case that, changed that. But the ox is slow, and sometimes the earth is not patient, or as patient as, it's supposed to be. And so I love, reading these demands. We don't have free contraceptives for everyone, and because of ACA, or the Affordable Care Act, some of the more effective forms of contraception are actually free for some people. Now, for our students who are uninsured, they can still access, or they don't want their birth control to go through their insurance because who's paying for their insurance potentially. They can go to our pharmacy and get some really low cost oral contraceptives, which is fantastic. It's a way that we always try, or that Watkins Health Services staff really try to make sure that their care, students' care, is affordable for them, and having it be judgment free. I don't know exactly when, but at some point, Watkins Health Services developed the office that I work in, which is the Health Education Resource Office. And one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is providing education to students on the areas that they tell us they need it the most. And my area of expertise at work happens to be in sexual health, especially sex positivity. And we have free sexual health coaching. A student just has to, sign up online. They can meet with us over Zoom. They can come in, and we can talk about all different kinds of things that they might have questions about, whether that's exploring their sexuality, their gender, exploring what contraception looks like, what are the options available to them, whether it's if they need abortive services, they're interested in where they can access different kinds of contraception. We'll talk to someone about absolutely anything. And what I find students want to have conversations about is about pleasure. And not just in Kansas, but in the United States, we do a piss poor job of celebrating the reason, the number one reason why human beings have sex, and that is for pleasure. Nobody talks about that, or not a lot of people. You probably feel bad for my son. You can imagine the sexual education he gets at home. But that's what students want to talk about. They're curious. Is it okay that I feel this way? Is it okay that I have a desire and passion? And how do I talk about what I want? And celebrating that with students, and letting them know that you can have that conversation with your partner. And the best kind of sex is where consent is involved. Of course, that's required. One final thing that I'm super proud of that we have now on campus, and we have it in this building. I don't know how frequently you all are in our buildings around campus, and that is the provision of free menstrual products throughout campus. in 50 restrooms and in our campus cupboard across 21 buildings. There are free menstrual products, which was actually something that was advocated for by students. Those students have graduated. I was super happy to get to work with them on that. It's something that's been kept going through the office or the Division of Student Affairs, which is where Dr. Brown and I work out of. So tampons, pads, we even bought menstrual cups, 100 menstrual cups gone in 48 hours. I had no idea there would be that much excitement for that, but it's something that people need. I mean, you can't control, what your body is doing, what it's supposed to do. And so many people that menstruate experience an interruption in their workday, their school day, because they weren't expecting to start menstruating at that moment or at that time. They might have to leave campus, they have to change clothes, whatever might happen. And so those dispensers are in gender or all-inclusive gendered restrooms, female designated gendered restrooms, and then also male designated gendered restrooms if there's not an all-inclusive restroom on campus. Super exciting. Of course, we still pass out safer sex kit supplies, internal condoms, external condoms, lube, which is like the unsung hero of sex. So all different kinds of fun stuff. I think I have the best job in the world, if you can't tell. All the funnest things.
I have to add something to this.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that I think surprised me the most when I got into the Dean of Women's archives was, well, the first thing that surprised me the very most, because I kept thinking about this mail carrier who was dropping this stuff off at the Dean of Women's office, and it would say, Office of the Dean of Women, Dean Emily Taylor, 220 Strong Hall or whatever it was, and you'd turn it over and it would be like the bitch manifesto. So they were subscribing to every single radical feminist thing they could get their hands on. But at the same time, they started in 68, KU started with sexual harassment training, and with their, the women students were running a lot of that. It was called the Women's Student Government. It was called the Associated Women Students. But they were also doing a lot of the same work you're talking about with regard to healthy relationships, healthy sex. They were doing all of that out through the union and the student activities, and also through the Women's Student Government. So in some ways, these things sound so new, but in other ways, they've really been around for quite a while. The whole reason we started any sort of sex ed in the first place was because of STIs after World War I. So it's just interesting that some of that is very similar. There would be some people who were here when you were who would be excited to hear it's still going on.
For sure. Huge. I actually teach a human sexuality class here at KU, and it's just devastating to me the lack of knowledge that people have despite the activity they are participating. And can you imagine driving without a class beforehand or doing anything else without instructions at all? It's pretty interesting.
So I'd like to switch gears. I don't need it. I think I'll just talk really loud. To switch gears and talk a little bit about childcare and what was going on with childcare. In the beginning, Joan, I think you're one of the people that can talk about what you walked into in 1973. Or
Well,
5.
It was 75, right?
Yeah.
I knew that Hilltop was starting and had started, and I was an HDFL, and I was running a preschool class, and then I was teaching a lot of early childhood, and I also worked at KNI for a year.
KNI, could you say what that is?
KNI is the Kansas Neurological Institute
Mm-hmm.
for severely and profoundly handicapped children who
Will be my closer.
were institutionalized,
Yeah.
and so I worked there to observe, and I tried to, and then on my own, I actually started a parent group, and we had classes and things like that. So I was interested in that. So then I also worked with various in special ed, at that time, and so when I got my master's degree, I I wanted to work in childcare, but there wasn't anything available. So when this opened up, I thought, okay, I think I'll apply, and I did. And I did get the job, and I really liked it, but it was so interesting because the second day that I was walking through the building, saying, this building is mine, this 2-3 floors, all these children will be here, and the teachers. And Peggy Scally, if anybody knew her, from the health department walked in. She said, are you the new director? And I said, yes. And she said, I have a list of offenses. I don't know what she said. She said, some of these things are not being done right. And she said, I'll have to close you down if you don't meet these, the health department's recommendations, or I guess some of it was not a recommendation, you had to do it. One was always having 2 teachers in a classroom, and she said, you will not let the teachers all leave and have one person in each classroom at lunchtime. And I said, I get it, because I was in HDFL. But anyway, it was exciting. I had Lori, what's Lori's last name? Oh, I'll think of it. Anyway, and Charles Higginson, and really great teachers. I had one teacher who was really sweet, and he worked with the 2-year-old room, and he always wanted to take a group of children off by himself, and he couldn't do that. So I had to change things, and we had wonderful teachers, but they were kind of they hadn't really been instructed to make lesson plans and post them. There were just issues, and I worked around that. So
I'm curious for the students
yes.
that were advocating for the service that they badly needed.
Right.
How is this affecting them when there was not access to childcare? What were they doing? Were they bringing kids to class, or how was it showing up on campus?
Well, I don't think there was anything, because there were some communities, but most people used home daycare, I think. And this is probably what they did. When I came at the second year, there was already a long waiting list, and student parents had first priority, because I can remember the second or third year I was there, a person came in, he was a new faculty member, and he introduced himself, and he wanted childcare, and I said, there's no room, and he was indignant, just very upset. And I said, well, you need to get on the waiting list. And at one time there was 3 programs, and there was 5 programs, and we had 6 programs. We added. We had a kindergarten, we had after school. We actually bought a van, and I got a chauffeur's license and picked up children from school and brought them there, and we did all kinds of things. And I really had a wonderful staff. Slowly, what I wanted to do is hire people who were certified in early childhood education, but I knew that would take time. Especially in kindergarten, I wanted an elementary education teacher. So, and I did want to be certified. That was important to me, to have high expectations of Hilltop. I also got very involved in the state, the education of young children. It was the Kansas Education of Young Children, and I became president one year, president-elect, and we had all kinds of programs. I wanted to know about what everybody was doing across the state, what their problems were, how they solved them, who they served, the finances, everything. So it was an exciting time. I was there 18 years, and I loved it. and I did add classrooms too. It wasn't free, and I thought that was interesting, because teachers had to be paid, and just the way it was. Some people were sponsored by SRS. A lot of the single parents were able to get childcare free because they qualified. So that was good. I really appreciate that.
So, Kathy, I'm wondering, was this a frequent question through the Info Center? Was it called the Info Center back then, or the Information Center?
Yep.
It was called the Information Center, and I can't ever remember anybody asking a question about childcare. I think by the time Hilltop was established, people knew about it.
We had over 100 children. We were licensed for over 100.
Yeah. Again, that was not one of the burning issues, unless you were a parent, and then it was probably the most important issue.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy, could you talk about what about Hilltop today?
Sure. I would say the foundations of what we do are gonna sound very similar to what you guys all did in the 70s. The foundation of high quality, highly trained staff to provide education, not daycare, to our kids, and providing a real solid opportunity for families to go to school, graduate, while not worrying about what their kids were doing throughout the day. We talked about the home cares, which were mostly unregulated, in the 70s and before, some today. I will say some of the same issues are still present. We currently have, you start off with 50 to 100 students in the building. We currently have 312. And while that's enormous for a child facility, it's a drop in the bucket to the need that's present, and by no means is it free. And so to have, the opportunity for students to go to school, how do you make it as inexpensive as possible for them to continue to do that? The faculty member who's indignant, I assure you that is still the same response we get. My wife is faculty and I can appreciate that. But putting those students first on that priority wait list to make sure they get in when they need care. We don't have kindergarten anymore. The Lawrence schools going all day kindergarten did wipe out most of those private kindergarten programs, but we still have the after school program. We still have an extensive wait list, so there's still a lot of need. But almost all of the KU students who want a spot have a spot. We're full. We've already registered for August of 22. So unfortunately, if you come in next week, you have to go on a wait list. But again, the students get priority. You talked about, I would say the Hilltop role in our community has changed, and through what Joan did in the 70s, and Pat Paisani did through the 90s and 2000s, was establish Hilltop as a leader in what we do. And so the expectation that not only are our staff going to be trained, our kids are going to have the highest quality education, but our leadership is going to be prominent in the development and the importance of early childhood. Being members of the Kansas Association for the Education of Young Children, I'm the president of the Lawrence chapter. We are still the only nationally accredited childcare facility in Douglas County. The National Association for the Education of Young Children is that accreditation, and it's really hard, but it would never have been possible without people like Joan, who made this a priority, and the February Sisters, who made this a priority, 50 years ago. I'm very fortunate to work there. I made that very clear 8 years ago. I never anticipated working there when my son started at Hilltop. But it's a unique place with the idea, as we talked about, 50 to 100 kids. It's possible by fall of 23 we're going to be at 450 students as we look at expansion again. For those of you who don't know, we are sitting right in the middle of Central District. If you remember the construction project that was super fun over there, we were the only thing remaining. They dug up to our doors, but they were adamant, and the people on campus were adamant you weren't to touch our building. They fought for us to stay put and to stay running the entire time we were there, or during that project. And it's been exceptional to see the support we got. And I'm a huge beneficiary, as were all of my children, for the work that was done, but it established a culture of this is important to the university. On the other side of that, with the expansion, I can go down to a couple other demands. It's predominantly female work staff, and the wages are atrocious. In my 8 years, we've brought the salaries up by 45%. That's to say they make $30,000 a year, which is great for the field, which tells you how terrible the field still is when it comes to this. It's something we're working very hard on to continue to improve we have master's degrees making, they're making $15 an hour at best. And so those are things we're still continuing to fight for and work on, not only to make it inexpensive for our students, but also to make sure that those young women, mostly our demographic is mostly mid-20s, early 30s, they're going to have children. They have a place they can send their kids. They have a wage they can live with and still function, not go, it's cheaper just to not work. but they're excellent teachers, and we don't want to lose them. So making sure those types of policies and practices are in place are something we've really advocated for over the last few years. We have a very long way to go, but I feel like we're making progress in those fields. So.
Well, and I think having you all on the panel, the issues related to, medical support and childcare, it's really clear how fortunate it is we have you all working on it, but how important all of us need to be aware of what's going on and where the holes still are. I'd like to talk for just a few minutes about affirmative action. I know a number of you along the table are aware of some of the work that was going on, and so we'll talk about what's going on now. We could be here all day just on that portion of it, but could you talk a little bit about that demand, the affirmative action demand by the sisters? Who would like to
I can
take
really do
the
that.
microphone for this one?
So this again is a instance where I think the student, what I would call radical feminist students, and then we had some liberal feminist students, and then we had the Dean of Women's Office, and they were definitely liberal feminists, but they would perfectly happy to give the radical feminists a hand up if they could do it quietly. So, but the affirmative action, the first complaint that was addressed against KU was actually typed on Dean Emily Taylor's typewriter in her office by, I'll have to stop and think about who it was. So the questions about affirmative action and applying it to women, I think were things that, now we just think of affirmative action as handling race, gender, religion, just boom. But it didn't back then. They assumed it was going to be race only. And so this idea that you could use it to address gender inequity, or what they would have called sex inequity, was new. And so that piece of it, I think, was something that internally within the administrative offices was getting absolutely no traction. And that was the case across the country. You could just read the history of affirmative action and women's issues in higher education, and it took a while for that to get up and running. So I think that from that perspective, Dean Taylor supported that. I think she was delighted that the February Sisters put it in as part of the list, because I think she knew there was no way they were going to work towards that otherwise. She also reminded me that the quickest way to radicalize a female professor who thought everything was equal, was to show them the salary schedules. And that solved it really, really quickly when they realized that they'd been there 8 years longer and were making half as much. So I think there were a lot of really egregious issues with regard to pay equity at KU that now we just wouldn't, we go through our balancing and everything. And I'm not saying we have it perfect, but back then it was just such an assumption. Matter of fact, there was a nepotism clause at KU for a very long time that if you were the primary faculty member who was hired, your spouse could not work at KU, period. So they couldn't take a faculty role.
Wow.
So there was, and you can imagine how that worked out gender-wise, right? So the piece of affirmative action that worked towards leveling salaries for men and women, I think could not have happened without the February Sisters as quickly as it happened at KU, because it was really entrenched in the system and how people did things.
And nationally too, of course.
Nationally too, yep. And Dean Taylor, by the way, was good friends with Bunny Sandler, and she is the woman who came up with the idea that you could sue because universities took federal money. So, all right, anything?
Other thoughts about affirmative action?
Beth, do you have
Kathy,
any?
having worked for Shirley, are there, in your experience working with her, were there things you might be able to add, having seen her office in action.
Well, it was my good fortune that Shirley Domer was named the first affirmative action director at KU, because that meant she left the information center and that became my job. I was promoted into that job, so I owe a lot to affirmative action in that way. One of the things that I remember is that they put her office, the first affirmative action office, in the basement of Strong Hall on the East End, about as dreary a place, a windowless set of offices. But real estate on university campuses is a huge issue, and real estate in Strong Hall was a big deal. And the people who were already in those offices, math professors, were just outraged. And they were kicked out. I don't know where they went, but they had to leave those horrible offices so affirmative action could move in. They actually, I hope this is true, maybe it's apocryphal, but I remember learning it then, that they put together a mathematical formula that showed that affirmative action was not important or essential, was not going to do any good at KU, and that therefore that these people, these women, needed to be thrown out of these offices until they could go back. So that's really all. I mean, she went off and did those important things, and I ran the information center. That's the only connection other than our friendship.
But I do think that speaks to the institutional will, because as we look through all these demands, and our colleagues who are working there today are saying, well, it's not free. I mean, KU didn't have the institutional will to actually fund it. And I think with the same way with the affirmative action office, and they, at that point, the office that was going to handle African American affairs was urban affairs. And there were just so many things that they really did not fund. And if you go back, and one of the things I love to do, but this makes me the nerd of the century, but I like to go back and look at the budgets and who was getting what and who was getting paid how much and yada, yada, yada. Like, for instance, the Dean of Women was paid back then, a $10,000 salary was huge, right? So the Dean of Women was probably making about $7,500, but the Dean of Men was only making about $6,000, which shows you that she was actually more on the level of the Vice President of Students, the overall Dean of Students. So long story short, I love to get into the budget and look that stuff up. And if you start to really look at that, it just, I think KU administration just said the students had to fund it if they wanted it. And then you end up with all of the same things we have today with who's going to fund what. And I mean, that part never, ever, ever goes away in higher education history or current, I guess. But I do think it's important, institutional will is reflected by where we spend our money. So I always tell young undergraduates, follow the money. That's the best story.
I wanted to say that some of the students through SRS did receive free childcare. I mean, they were needy and they proved it, and so it did happen.
Well, I want to make sure we have enough time for audience questions, but I have one final question for you, brief question. We're the current panel, you are the current panel of February Sisters and Brothers. What would the demands look like now? What needs to be addressed now?
I'd like to make a comment about that. I don't know the answer. One of the brilliances of the February Sisters was that they created the right amount of pain. They occupied a building that didn't stop the campus or stop traffic or break the law in any great way. It was just the right amount of pain. They asked a list of questions that were doable by the people they were asking. Money may have been a little bit of an issue, but they didn't ask for world peace or end of the Vietnam War. They asked for very specific and doable things. These things didn't even need action by the Board of Regents. So That was absolutely brilliant by the February Sisters. And that's why by the next morning, you had yes and yes and yes and yes and yes. So my question is then, what is this list for us today? And who is this body or set of bodies that we need to ask these lists of? And what is that appropriate amount of pain that we want to give them? And it's not an easy question. It seems so obvious looking back, but it was strategic and brilliant, and I don't have an answer today. Get the historians to come up with it.
Well, I don't know. I look back, not forward. So I don't know that I have the answer to that. But I would say that the other piece of brilliance in what they did was that Chalmers, who was the chancellor, had just followed Wesco, who'd been escorted out by the Board of Regents, right? He had left. And they'd had a lot of protest after Kent State. And he was on very thin ice with the Board of Regents. And so when the February Sisters took over East Asian Studies building, he hauled Emily Taylor, Frances Horowitz, and Marilyn Stockstead into their office and just insisted that they call the women and ask them to leave. And Marilyn told me once, well, he was thumping the table, he was pounding. And I said, oh, he was pounding. And she said, oh no, I didn't mean to say that. He was lifting his fist and putting it down firmly on the table in front of me. But the point being, Chalmers could, and this was what I think both Emily Taylor and Marilyn Stockstead were saying to the chancellor, is you're going to have a media parade and you're going to be right back in front of the Board of Regents with all of this stuff all over again. So that was the other piece, is there was so much turmoil going on at this time. That's right. And I think Chalmers knew that more turmoil meant the end of that. So that, I think, was a big piece in their timing too. I don't know if it was conscious or not, but boy, it was smart. So, and then for the future, I think we should ask the audience.
Yeah, I would just add one thing as far as your comments of follow the money. And as we talk about free this and free that, and the question I think in healthcare and as student healthcare is also for, they have the student health fee currently, and the question of as we move maybe more and more, is obviously in society healthcare has gotten a lot more expensive. And looking at if we're going to more private pay and health insurance, then it ties in with who that's available for. And so I think that's one of the big concerns or questions as far as where we go in terms of the payment for that. So.
Always money.
Always money, yeah. The will to pay. The university found a way for the students to pay for the things they wanted healthcare wise. That's what has ended up happening. And Watkins Health Services they are paying for those services. They say it's free for students to come visit them, but students have a required campus fee they have to pay, and which is great because they get to meet with fantastic doctors. I need to be careful. I still work for KU. And they get to see fantastic physicians and other providers like Dr. Brown and the rest of that staff. But it's not free at all. I mean, every t-shirt you pick up on this campus, every promotional item, every piece of paper, students have paid for. But you asked that question about maybe what would be on our students' punch list of maybe what they would be looking for, asking about. Well, this February Sisters panel and the rest of them are all happening in the month of April, which is when we honor Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And because Pride Month is in June nationally, but our students are not on campus, we also celebrate Gabriel, which I think are two huge themes that our students would say we need more action and activism surrounding. If you were here last week, you saw on Watson Lawn, there were 3,354 white flags that represent each of the KU students who'd be a survivor of sexual assault next academic year. That's 1 in 4 cisgender women, 1 in 14 cisgender men, and 1 in 2 trans students. That's a shocking amount of students. Issues related to sexuality and gender equity, I think, are still very pronounced. And I love hearing you say, like, it's, the work that we're doing is not new at all. My goodness gracious, like, when are people going to get sick of having to do this kind of work, I'm sure it'll be happening long after I've been here and gone. I hear students talk a lot about still wanting free STI testing. And while we provide free HIV testing occasionally, STI testing is not free. It's actually quite expensive to have done. And we have more and more Pell eligible students entering our institution every year. It becomes very much so out of reach. You start understanding that the largest health detriment that you can have is not being a part of the majority. If you have any marginalized identity, it's that much more difficult to access healthcare and to succeed academically.
Well, I want to make sure we have time for questions. Would you all thank our panelists before we get into questions? It's funny, as we're talking about February Sisters 50 years ago, how very relevant and current this really is. So I'd like to ask you all in the audience, what questions do you have of our panelists? What would you like to know more about? And Meg, I'm sorry to call on you, but do you mind being the microphone person?
Of course.
I have something for the list. Pay equity.
Yeah, we're still on that, aren't we? Did you see it?
So one of the things that obviously you all pointed out was that the demands were very specific, they were achievable, they were addressed of particular people who might be able to grant them. One of the things I was curious about, and wondering if perhaps Beth Bailey could speak to, is the question of what's going on in terms of sexual culture on the campus at that time that might be underlying some of this. So the demands for sexual health from the clinic, the demands for a women's studies program. I'm its chair, it's still going strong, I'm happy to report. What's going on specifically at KU about the relations between men and women and sexual sort of responsibility at the time that might have been underlying some of what's going on here too, but they can't ask those things of the dean, basically.
I could probably. Thanks. Thanks, Nick. Again, it was a moment of possibility because in the 1960s, there was a very powerful set of understandings that women could, quote, lose value by being sexually active. And that didn't mean that women weren't sexually active. It just meant that acknowledging it publicly was very risky, especially because news tended to travel home from the university. So in 1966, there was a panel talking about whether or not women should have access to birth control if they weren't married. And a woman wrote a letter to the UDK supporting the notion that she, as an unmarried woman, wanted and deserved free access to birth control pills, and they allowed her to publish this without her name included because they thought it was so risky to put her name on it. And there was a stringent policy for the UDK that said we don't publish anything that's not signed. So this seemed so strange. In 1970, a psychologist for the university told a newspaper reporter here at KU that women's actions and dress contributed powerfully to them becoming victims of sexual assault, and went on to say, why are women so surprised when they dress like this? Dr. Schwegler said that he did so many gynecological exams, he felt like he was working in a whorehouse. And there were extraordinarily powerful sets of disincentives to women accepting and embracing publicly the joys of sex. At the same time, that there was an enormous outpouring of experimentation, sexual revolution, and so both men and women were more likely to have sex, were starting to be more likely to claim it, and there was also a growing gay liberation movement on campus with an awful lot of pushback publicly, but a reasonable amount of support behind the scenes from upper administration. I mean, that's one of the most interesting things I found, and so did Kelly, is how much support there was among some of the members of the upper administration for some of these changes, and how complicated a line they had to walk then and still often have to walk now to not fully alienate the Board of Regents and the Kansas legislature while trying to give behind the scenes and often inadequate support to some of the movements that are going on campus. Many of them found themselves in difficult positions. But again, I just go back to the point that the early 1970s was a moment of possibility, and it was a moment when not only cisgendered heterosexual men and women, but gay men and lesbians were starting to embrace possibilities and starting to insist on the possibility of doing it publicly. And that was an enormous revolution.
And then to go to some of the specifics, so the birth control pill comes out in 1960, and up until that point, if you look at the stats, the most popular form of birth control in the United States was actually a Lysol douche. I don't know how many of you all are aware of that, but if you go, I know it's horrid. So if you go back in the old 1940s Life magazines, and you'll see these Lysol ads that say for all your household hygiene needs, and then it'll have a Italian woman doctor in the on the bottom corner or something. So I do think sometimes we forget that there were actual quote unquote social penalties. You paid a price if you were female and you were willing to discuss these issues or step forward, because there was such a rigid sense of what was respectable in women with regard to sex and what wasn't. And so I think sometimes we forget that what the choices they were making were actually not the simplest choices to make. And sometimes we sort of giggle about it going back to the parents or whatever, but it really, I found lots of times when the Dean of Women would work really hard to keep the young woman's name private, because if she didn't keep it private, she might as well leave the institution and go somewhere else. So I think we sometimes forget that that's how strong those morality codes were. The other thing I would say is that in 1960, when the pill comes out, there is a doctor, which there's a lot in Professor Bailey's book about the doctor who hands out birth control pills. They have funding from the population concerns, right? So there is actually funding for it. Lawrence is getting tons of money from the federal government to make sure we don't have a population explosion. And the young women on campus had figured out pretty darn quickly they can go over there and they can get them. And I think it was Catherine Nemeth Tuttle who told us that they were handing them out like bubble gum. Am I right about that?
They were handing them out to me. I'll just share a little story that I was leaving KU to be abroad for a year. I was going to study in Nigeria, and I went into him to explain this kind of what should I do? He came out with a box, a giant box, and just gave them to me.
Yeah.
Of course, they did it without exams or any health issues.
Right.
They never asked if I had high blood pressure or anything, but it was complete relief from what you got in Watkins, unfortunately, at the time, which was this very misogynistic thing.
But it
I
was.
actually have one pet ad for the.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Was that at the health department?
Yes,
That
it was the health department. Yeah.
It was
in the basement of Watkins Museum.
Oh, was it?
No, it was in 8th and New Hampshire.
8th and New Hampshire. See, we all know where.
Of course they did. They had it figured out really quick because it was free. And so what Dean Taylor did were two things. Donna Shablik, who I think some of you probably knew, who told me to say hello to everybody that she might possibly know. I was just on the phone with her last night. She actually started in 1961 mimeographing all of you remember the mimeograph? Like they had to stand there and to make a copy. and it would come out on this pink paper with like purple lettering, just so you know if you're not old enough to remember that. But anyway, they were all instructions on what to do with the pill, because some women were thinking it was like you take one and you go have sex and it's
They
fine.
still think that.
Yeah, they still. So long story short, so you had the Dean of Women's Office engaging in what they would have, I think they would have said, we knew the women were doing this, we wanted to make sure they were safe. And that was their biggest concern with Dr. Schwegler, was he was not allowing them to get any of the pap smears, the blood pressure, all of those things. They were just running over to the health. They were very upset with the health department. So I just wanted to point those couple of things out, in that, again, it's where the institution quietly is doing things behind the scenes that you don't necessarily realize when you're a student. Sometimes, like, you don't know where the mimeograph piece of paper came from that tells you how to use the pill. You just read it and you follow it, right? So I think that was a pretty large piece of it as well. And, there we go. Here. And by the way, she didn't support the Women's Studies program. I'll tell you about that later.
I do, as we're thinking in the future, I think we're all very concerned about what's going to happen with Roe v. Wade this summer. And what does that mean for KU students? And I've been reading about underground already starting with, going back to the alley butchers kind of situation. So I think that's something that for the future we all have to be concerned about. That obviously that environments change in terms of other alternatives, but that's a deep concern, I think, for a lot of us.
Yeah, I was going to talk about something different. The question of what are the needs now? One of the things I've been thinking about is, the university is corporatizing itself, and it's on this huge thrust of centralizing everything. And I'm thinking about how that differentially affects employees on campus by gender, and that is, they have these shared service centers, and now they're merging the shared service centers. I just found out today that they want to merge all of the advisors into somewhere on the visitors center. Who are the people who are being sent to these central jobs? It's primarily women, and those jobs end up being so unpleasant when they're removed from the departments that they were working with, that the turnover in those jobs is really high. And I think that's something that people should be concerned about.
This is also kind of on the what needs to be addressed now, but one thing I was kind of thinking of about the February Sisters is, like, I'm non-binary, and I was thinking more of, like, I don't know who this we is, like, advocacy and rights for LGBTQ plus people has come a ways, but I think on KU and other campuses as well, there's still not as much. I think there's a lot more recognition and such for sexualities, but not as much for those who may be gender nonconforming or trans and such. And I was wondering if there are, like, ideas or things we can do to get, like, more, I guess, the ball rolling on that kind of stuff, for people aligning more with, not being cis rather than or both, but more on the gender side.
So you're asking the panel their thoughts on ways there can be more support and action for non-binary people. Did I pick that up correctly?
Just gender nonconforming people in general, yes.
Well, I can tell you what Italy would tell you. Now, this was a strategy for 1956 through 1974. But I can tell you what she would tell you. And what she would tell you is find the places where the power already exists, which is going to be student government, and get involved in those locations and make your priorities move forward. Because one thing she said to me, I don't know, man, I've probably been meeting with her for about 7 years, and she just looked at me and said, haven't you figured it out yet, Kelly? There is no substitute for a seat at the table. None. If you're not at the table, you're not in the conversation. And so she would sometimes make, like, the reason she didn't support women's studies was because she was afraid that if you put all of the feminists over in one department by themselves, that was like the institution's dream, right? Because no one would bother them anymore and they could just shut them out. And which for a while maybe happened, but I think we're at a place where we're really good. She would be pleased now. But I guess long story short, she would say find the places that you can get involved in the system that already is existing, because that's here. Now, that doesn't mean the system's going to help you solve your problem. You have to really, you have to get a lot of people who are going to coordinate and work with you. But I do believe she's right. If you're not in the conversation when people are figuring out how to spend the money, or the chancellor's making choices and the provost's office is doing whatever, you just got to really push to be in those conversations. And I mean, that might be convincing some of your tenured faculty to get in some of those conversations too, because the tenured faculty are the ones who are, matter of fact, that Emily was the only person who went to the February Sisters office when the chancellor demanded that they show up. She was the only one who went without tenure. Everybody else who went were fully tenured, because they didn't want there to be any, because there would be backlash, right? So find your fully tenured faculty members who support you and go plan a revolution. That's what Emily would say.
Do you want to talk a little bit about gender affirming care that you offer?
Sure. As far as gender affirming care, again, that has, as certainly all the time I've been there, and probably certainly a long time before that, we've had transgender students at KU and not gender non-conforming students, and it has kind of evolved from when I was first there. It was kind of that if someone had come with that they were on this medication, then we would take care of them, but we didn't supply the medication. To going to, if they had an endocrinologist, a specialist who told us to prescribe it, then they were followed. To going to, now we're active as far as seeing patients coming in and speaking with them as far as gender, and if they have gender diversity, and then we actually institute and follow them in terms of gender affirming hormones, and also coordinate with counseling and psychological services or with other people. It's still sometimes a little bit of a question as far as just individual decisions and not being perceived as a real gatekeeper, but so again, it's very available, and we're working more and more with the Gender Diversity Center in terms of just awareness and other types of things. It's not all about gender affirming hormones, and so just what kind of programs. And we also, the other thing that gets a little bit to the talk of coordination and consolidation of resources is that last year most of us at Watkins actually became employees of the University of Kansas health system, as opposed to being KU employees and being state employees. So just as far as and how it all will go in terms of insurance and just costs of health care and different things, but as part of that, again, they do have a strong gender diversity clinic over at the University of Kansas health system. So like lots of things, there are, I'm sure, going to be pluses and minuses that were a part of a bigger as far as coordination. But so that's some of the changes.
Sure. Absolutely. I was just going to mention the Center for Sexuality and Gender Diversity has a brand new director, Ash Wilson, who's already making some really tremendous connections across campus, and someone that both Dr. Brown and I have been emailing with and communicating with. There is the trans closet down in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. It really is about community. I mean, KU's when I was a student, it was called Q&A, Queers and Allies, but it's the third oldest sexuality and gender diversity student group in the United States. Right now, it's currently under the name of the Sunflower Coalition, but representation really matters. I mean, in KU and many other institutions don't keep track of the sexual diverse students here. How many students need services or are interested in community? We don't know. We don't keep track of that. So why not start there with how we welcome people into this institution and then make sure that there's representation among the people that work here. That way our students can find community if they are looking for it. But our SGD Center is, I think, on its way up and up with its brand new director.
In the union, just down a couple floors, if you go right down.
Yeah, just to build off of what Jenny was saying, I'm Megan Williams. I'm the Assistant Director of the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity. And when I started here 6 years ago, I worked closely with a non-binary student who did not really feel especially welcomed at SGD. It's gone through many directors in the time that I've been here, and they came to the Emily Taylor Center and we started to work with them a lot on education around these issues. And the new director does identify as non-binary, and so I think that's a huge kind of step forward in recognition of that growing population, and I think that SGD will be much more welcoming and affirming for non-binary folks. So just wanted to add that.
This will be our last question.
Let it be a February sister.
Oh, okay.
I can go here.
Maybe we should have two.
Sorry.
Just two. Maybe we should have two.
Two
Yeah.
questions.
Two questions.
So you want to go down and we can see if we agree with you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. My name is Peter DeRoy, and I'm a graduate student in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. I moved to Kansas in 2017, and I started KU WGSS in 2018, and in that same year, I found out or learned about February Sisters. So fast forward, I'm teaching this semester, and I know, March 8th is International Women's Day, and I'm teaching Introduction to Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and over the years or decades, we can say we've seen the discipline move from women studies to include gender and to include sexuality. So my question really with that whole preamble is standing on the back or the shoulders of February Sisters. How do you feel February Sisters are engaging with current issues, in terms of their visibility, in terms of where we say Women International Women's Day? What does that mean for KU, the KU economy? What does it mean for the February Sisters? And when I talk up to my students and I say, hey, do you know how this program got here? That they can immediately make a connection to that history. So I guess this question is really about staying in the pockets, as you said. How is February Sisters staying in the pockets, indirectly or directly, in KU admin or whatever bodies may exist, to keep the issues moving? It's not an easy question, but I know. Thank you. Look, I'm different.
Okay. Then we'll combine the two questions and see if we can't have a couple of comments to answer both things that you brought up. How's that sound? Joe, please go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
I have several Black friends, and whenever we get together, we have a conversation about how difficult it is today at KU for BIPOC to be hired, to be recognized, to keep their jobs. And I would really like to see that issue. I couldn't help but notice that the panel seems phenotypically white. I could be wrong, but thank you. I would really like to see that issue. I know a lot of professors, white as well, who've been concerned about this also. So I would really like to see that taken up, and I would like to have the subject not changed.
I'm sorry, the subject not changed.
I find my experience has been that when we talk about racism, white people always want to change the subject. So I want to stay on the subject, and I apologize that I thought maybe we were the same.
There were several women of color who were, I don't know if there were women of color in February Sisters. To my knowledge, I don't think they were. But there were several women of color who worked in the Dean of Women's office, and there were multiple women of color who were involved in, I think, the broader pieces that we're talking about. And I think probably apropos of what you're saying, the outreach to those particular individuals, I don't think has happened on this campus. I could probably come up with 3 names. If someone were to call Kayla Stroop, who was the last Dean of Women at KU, she could probably give you several names. But I don't think that as an institution, when we've told this history, that people have, they've always just assumed that Dean of Women meant white women, and so they didn't really look, I think, as much as they could have. Now, that's not to say that it was, there certainly was not the same level of diversity that you would see today by any means. But I do think there were pieces there that we have not gone and found. And I think that's something that would be a good thing to do.
So I think one thing we can take from the conversation, there's a lot of great projects and initiatives. We encourage some of you in the audience to pick them up, and we need more research, we need more information on all these topics, and you started a great question. The sad part is we probably need to be here a little longer than we had scheduled to really give it a good, fair answer. But I think some of our panelists may have more answers for you.
And if there's anyone who wants to work on that project, or there's a faculty member who has a student who wants to work on that project, I'd be more than happy to make the connections to the people who could make the connections. Because I think it's history that has completely gotten, they just told it one way and went on going. And I did try to reach several of them, but not all women of color were wild about Dina Taylor. So, anyway.
Can I just say one thing, just because
Sure.
I don't want to change the subject?
Yes, thank you.
So just very quickly, I do know that the Office of Faculty Development has undergone a number of surveys recently to track very specifically the number of faculty of color who have come to the institution and those who have left. So there are offices that are very much trying, because they are responding to lots of genuine concern across the KU campus about this very problem. So it is a recognized issue. That does not mean that they've fixed it, but I just want to note that there are people paying attention to this who are trying to track and solve that.
Well, the question is how high is sort of priority for the administration to do anything about it?
Yeah. But also I think this is a really good segue into our panel on Thursday, which is featuring KU students who are currently active in organizations across campus. It's a diverse group of folks. We have people from KU Black Student Coalition, people from Students United for Reproductive and Just Gender Equity, somebody from the Graduate Teaching Assistance Coalition, people from various pockets around campus. And I think they really do represent, whether they know it or not, and that might be an interesting part of the question, a legacy, right, here at KU. And so I'd really encourage people to come out and hear what current students have to say and help us like make the connections that you're asking about. Yeah.
And I would also ask panelists, is there anything else you would want to add to respond to either of those questions that came forward? I don't like to cut either of those very important questions short, but I want to make sure we have the opportunity to wrap things up.
I last week was on a Zoom call as a member of the faculty staff Sexuality and Gender Diversity Council, where the two highest members of our leadership here at this institution, our chancellor and our provost, were asked some really tough questions about an exodus of our faculty and staff of color. And I can say that I'm not sure there was a response at all to those questions. I don't know why, and I will not venture to make excuses for anyone.
Make a petition ready for Thursday.
But that's the most recent development that I have heard is that still not a lot.
Did they seem surprised by the question?
They had the questions at least a week ahead of time and had a prepared response for them.
And I think another thing to just emphasize there is that it's Black and brown, queer and trans people who have really been kind of pushed out recently. So just to emphasize that, because you said it was the SGD Center.
Oh, there was multiple councils that were all together. There were 3 or 4 different councils who were all together for this annual meeting that we do with the chancellor and the provost.
And I think there was another comment at the end of the table. Did you have one?
I wanted to respond to your question about how do you keep the memory of the February Sisters alive. I'm not a professional historian, but that's what I came here to study, and I think things just get lost, and it's hard to keep all that alive. You can help just by bringing it up every year.
I'll open WGSS. I'll put a plug out. I also like to put docu-series together. So if there's ways in which we can do have a mini docu-series that even will contribute to what's happening with different departments, different programs, what have we accomplished, and what does it should be wrong, sexual assault that's happening on campus in these particular ways, the washroom. Yes. How can we, when we talk about what, because I know for sure I get excited about February Sisters and its evolution, because that's what KU means to me, because also with the department that I'm in, and I want that conversation to keep going louder and for us to keep in the pocket. So we keep expanding resources and putting more research. So yeah, I'm interested in, if you have the money, I know you can get the people.
It's a heroic story, and it happened right here with students and classified employees. So yeah.
I see Kathy's hands
Just
up.
one comment, just thinking blue sky, There's a big building going up across the street. Yeah, it's called the KU Welcome Center. There's going to be a lot of content in there that prospective new students will see, and existing students. Maybe the February Sister story needs to be part of that.
What a great idea.
That's a wonderful
That's a
idea.
great idea.
Well, we have exceeded our time. I want to be a good timekeeper. I want to thank all of you for coming, and let us give a big round of applause.